Let me ask you something. Most people get completely wrong about the M1 Abrams. They think it's the tank that can't be stopped, a rolling fortress so advanced that no enemy weapon on Earth can crack it open. That reputation isn't accidental. It was built through decades of one-sided battlefield results. But that's not the whole story, and the truth is far more sobering than the marketing footage ever let on. It's going to change how you think about what invincible actually means on a modern battlefield. Because here's the thing, the Abrams earned its reputation the hard way, in engagements where it genuinely outclassed everything it faced. But somewhere between the Gulf War and the wars that followed, that reputation calcified into something dangerous, an assumption of invulnerability that the tank itself was never actually designed to promise. And when that assumption finally collided with reality, it happened in ways that most people never heard about because they didn't fit the narrative everyone had already decided to believe. So here's where this video is going. First, we'll look at how the Abrams built its legend and why the numbers from its early combat record are as staggering as people remember. Then, we'll break down the design philosophy behind the tank, what it was actually built to survive and what it was never built to survive. We'll get into the moments the legends started to crack, in Iraq and later in other conflicts, where anti-tank weapons finally found the gaps. We'll examine the human cost inside that armor when things went wrong. And by the end, you'll understand why unstoppable was always the wrong word and what the right word actually is. The first thing you need to understand is just how dominant the Abrams was when it first proved itself in combat. During the Gulf War in 1991, American M1 Abrams tanks engaged Iraqi armor. Much of it Soviet-supplied T-72s in a series of engagements where the kill ratio was almost absurdly lopsided. According to several sources, Abrams crews destroyed Iraqi tanks at ranges far beyond what Iraqi gunners could effectively return fire, thanks to superior thermal sighting systems that let American crews see and engage through darkness, smoke, and dust that left Iraqi crews essentially blind. Combat losses of Abrams tanks to enemy fire during that war were remarkably low, and the handful that were lost were often attributed to friendly fire or crew error rather than enemy weapons ever penetrating the armor as designed. That record did something dangerous to public perception. It wasn't just that the Abrams won, it was that the Abrams won so completely, so one-sidedly, that the tank started to feel less like a weapon system with strengths and weaknesses and more like a piece of mythology, a machine simply beyond the reach of anything an adversary could field. Here's where it gets dangerous, because that mythology was never accurate to what the Abrams was actually engineered to do. The second thing you need to understand is the design philosophy behind the tank's protection. The Abrams uses layered composite armor, reinforced in later variants with depleted uranium plating. Concentrated specifically on the front hull and turret face, the angles the tank is expected to present. To an enemy in a conventional front-facing tank battle, that's a deliberate engineering trade-off. Heavier armor everywhere would make the tank too slow and too heavy to be strategically useful. So designers accepted weaker protection on the sides, the rear, and critically, the top of the vehicle, betting that a well-handled Abrams would rarely expose those angles to enemy fire in the kind of warfare it was built for. That bet worked brilliantly against Iraqi tank formations in open desert engagements in 1991. It worked far less reliably in the kind of warfare that came afterward, urban combat. Insurgency, ambush-style engagements where the enemy doesn't line up for a frontal tank duel and instead waits in alleyways, on rooftops, and beside roads for the tank to expose exactly the angles it was never designed to protect. Let's talk about the moment the legend actually started to crack. Because it wasn't one dramatic battle, it was a slow accumulation of losses during the Iraq War that never made the same headlines as the Gulf War's one-sided kill ratios. Insurgent forces in Iraq, and later similar forces fighting American-supplied Abrams tanks in other conflicts, learned to exploit exactly the vulnerabilities the tank's design had accepted as a trade-off. Improvised explosive devices placed to strike the thinner belly armor, rocket-propelled grenades, and more advanced anti-tank guided missiles fired from angles that targeted the rear engine compartment or the top of the turret rather than the heavily armored front glacis. According to several sources, a number of Abrams tanks were destroyed or severely damaged in Iraq using exactly this approach. Not through some single miracle weapon, but through patient, deliberate targeting of the geometry the tank was never built to defend. This is the part of the story that rarely gets the same attention as the Gulf War statistics, and it should. Inside every one of those tanks were 4 crew members, a driver, a gunner, a loader, and a commander, men who trusted the armor around them because the reputation they would inherited told them that trust was earned. When an anti-tank weapon found the one angle that Abrams wasn't built to survive, the results for the crew inside were catastrophic, and the families of those crews paid a cost that never appears in a kill ratio statistic. It's a sobering reminder that even the most advanced armor in the world is built around trade-offs, and someone eventually pays the price for every trade-off a design accepts. Here's the moment everything changed in how militaries thought about the Abrams and vehicles like it. The lesson from Iraq wasn't that the Abrams was a bad tank. It remained, by most measures, one of the most survivable armored vehicles ever fielded. The lesson was that no armor scheme, however advanced, can be treated as universal protection against every possible angle of attack in every possible environment. That lesson pushed the U.S. Army toward add-on armor kits, explosive reactive armor packages, and active protection systems designed specifically to intercept incoming projectiles before they ever reach the hull. Engineering solutions built directly in response to the gap insurgents and irregular forces had learned to exploit. Why does this matter right now? With modern conflicts increasingly featuring cheap, widely available anti-tank weapons and, more recently, loitering munitions and first-person view attack, drones capable of striking a tank's most vulnerable top armor from angles no crew can easily defend against? Because the same pattern is repeating on an even larger scale. Armored vehicles built around Cold War-era assumptions about frontal tank engagements are increasingly facing threats, specifically designed to attack from above and behind, and the tactical lessons first learned the hard way in Iraq are now shaping how every major military rethinks armored vehicle survivability for the drone era. The word to carry with you here is exposed, not weak, not obsolete, but exposed at specific angles that a determined enemy will eventually find and exploit. The Abrams was never actually unstoppable. It was extraordinarily well protected against the threats its designers anticipated, and vulnerable, like every vehicle ever built, to the threats they didn't, exposed. That's the truth beneath the legend, and it's a truth every modern military is being forced to relearn in real time as the character of warfare keeps shifting beneath their feet. So here's a question worth sitting with. If the most advanced tank in the world can be defeated by a weapon costing a tiny fraction of its price, fired from an angle its designers accepted as an acceptable risk, what does that tell you about the future of armored warfare altogether? Tell me in the comments whether you think the tank, as a concept, still has a future on a battlefield increasingly dominated by cheap precision weapons. If this kind of analysis is valuable to you, let me know which armored vehicle myth you want broken down next. There's no shortage of legendary machines whose real combat record doesn't match their reputation. Share this with anyone who still thinks any tank is truly unstoppable. And subscribe if you want more of this kind of deep, honest military analysis that goes past the highlight reel and into what actually happens on the battlefield.